So for those that don't know, describe how over 70% of UK laws are handed down from the EU, because this is something a lot of Americans don't understand.
That's a very good point, and it's actually 83%. It's 5 laws in 6 are handed down by the unelected commissars. That is the official German title for them, the commissars, that hated communist term for the people who ran the Soviet government. The commissars, the whole Soviet constitution has moved westward. 83% of Europe's laws, and that includes Britain's laws and Scotland's laws, are made by people that nobody elects. We can't hold them to account, we can't question them, we don't even know who they are, we can't remove them, and we can't replace them. These people are the enemies of freedom and democracy. They have their own agenda, which is not an agenda which you or I or the vast majority of good red-blooded Americans, Alex, would ever dream of going along with, and they make the laws. And shall I describe how they do it? Because it is a fascinating process. And it starts by them meeting in secret to decide. The commissars, there's 27 of them, they meet in secret, behind closed doors. Press not allowed in, nobody allowed to know what they're talking about. It's entirely secret. And then every 3 hours, day and night, 365 and a quarter days a year, they issue a new directive. That's what they call the law in Europe. Not a democratic bill or act, a directive.
And directive, as you know, is the root of dictator.
That's it. It is an instruction from our new masters on how we are to behave. And the so-called parliaments of the individual member states, like the Westminster Parliament and the Scottish Parliament, it is their duty to enact these directives into the law of the individual member states. And if they don't, then the government can be fined unlimited amounts of money by the commissars until they do comply. And so what happens is that the first stage of the law is this directive is proposed in secret. Then it is passed from the commissars to another secret committee, indeed a committee so secret that until just a few months ago, its very existence was not even mentioned on the European Union's own website. And this is the Committee of Permanent Representatives. By the very phrase permanent, you can tell that they're not elected, because election is not a permanent state. But they are appointed bureaucrats, nobody knows who they are. They meet in secret to do what you in Congress would call the markup, which is the detailed consideration of the legislation, and we would call the committee stage. And that, again, we would do it in public, you do it in public, they do it in secret, and they are not elected to do it. Then it goes from them to, would you believe, a third body also meeting in secret. This one is called the Council of Ministers. You think, ministers, perhaps they're elected. Yes, they are, but they don't sit on the Council of Ministers, well, not very often anyway. Normally the Council of Ministers is, you've guessed it, another group of unelected bureaucrats meeting in secret to decide whether the law proposed by the commissars and worked on by this Committee of Permanent Representatives shall become the supreme law of Europe. And if they say no, that's the end of it. If they say yes, then and only then it is put in front of the only elected institution in Europe. This is the European talking shop, or it's called a parliament. That's a joke word for it, really. And the talking shop can express an opinion, but it cannot decide the legislation. It cannot either decide in favour or against. All it can do is express an opinion. If it says yes, then the legislation, even then, doesn't necessarily go through, because the commissars have been known to put forward kind of stalking horse legislation they don't want to go through. So then it goes through all these stages, wasting everybody's time. Then the commissars say, we want to show who's boss, and we're going to not let that legislation proceed. And so they can then overrule the European elected Union.
And it goes on and on. But
the next stage.
Sure, go ahead.
One more stage. It then goes to the parliaments of the member states for debate. Well, of course, we don't get a debate in our parliament on this. It goes to the Legislative Scrutiny Committee of the House of Commons, and you've guessed it, that's the only committee of the House of Commons that meets behind closed doors in secret. Now, if you read the Madison Papers, and you see how insistent they were that the Congress that they created with Article 1, Section 1 of your great Constitution of Liberty was to meet in public so that those who had elected the members of both houses of Congress, or of course it was one house originally, but now both houses of Congress, could see what it was that those whom they had elected were doing and saying on their behalf. Democracy doesn't work unless legislation is considered in public. But every stage of the legislation that is now imposed upon us from Europe is conducted in secret, and nearly every stage is conducted by people whom we do not elect.